This story is a stark reminder that even those we think we know well can harbor hidden depths and unsettling secrets. What you perceive about someone might be a mere fraction of their true nature, leaving you utterly unprepared for their capabilities. This unsettling experience unfolded about 5 years ago. My girlfriend, Stacy, and I were feeling the intense pressure of daily life. To escape, she suggested renting a secluded cabin in the woods for a few days. I loved the idea, but our finances were tight. Stacy then proposed a couple's getaway with our best friend, Randy, and his girlfriend. They were close to us, and splitting the costs would make the trip affordable. I readily agreed, and Randy was enthusiastic about it too. Since it was the middle of winter, we wanted a cozy cabin with a fireplace to enhance the warm, inviting atmosphere. Stacy found the perfect cabin, and we booked it for the end of the month, eagerly planning our meals and activities. Less than a week before the trip, Randy and his girlfriend suddenly broke up, and it wasn't amicable. Stacy and I debated whether to offer Randy his money back, as we couldn't afford the trip alone, but it also felt wrong for him to pay for a trip he wasn't attending. When I called Randy, he brushed off my concerns, insisting we still go and enjoy a romantic getaway. Stacy was thrilled by the news, and we eagerly anticipated our alone time. However, just a few days before the trip, Randy called with an unexpected announcement. He had found someone else to join us. I wasn't thrilled, and Stacy shared my apprehension. We didn't want to travel with a random rebound whom Randy barely knew. I tried to explain the importance of travel compatibility, stressing that we knew nothing about this new woman. Randy pleaded with us, promising his new girlfriend would be cool and that we'd love her, even offering to pay for my entire portion of the trip. After much convincing, I reluctantly agreed. Stacy and I were far from happy, fearing the trip had the potential to devolve into an awkward disaster, a horror story in itself, but we decided to make the best of it. The weekend finally arrived, and we carpooled to the cabin in my truck. Randy introduced us to Lucy, who appeared sweet and somewhat quiet. Stacy and I, being quite outgoing and often loud, spent most of the drive trying to engage Lucy, but she remained reserved. By the time we reached the cabin, I'd barely heard her voice. The start of the trip was pleasant. We settled in and chatted comfortably around the fireplace. Stacy and I love playing card games, especially Uno, for its simplicity and universal appeal. Stacy suggested a game, and everyone agreed, even Lucy, who seemed to be slowly emerging from her shell. During the Uno game, we witnessed the first significant red flag of the weekend. When Stacy called Uno, Lucy's demeanor changed drastically. With an unexpected surge of rage in her typically soft voice, she erupted at Stacy, accusing her of cheating. We initially laughed, thinking she was joking, but her anger intensified. Lucy screamed hysterically, insisting Stacy must have cheated, an outrageous overreaction to a simple card game with people she barely knew. When Randy tried to calm her, Lucy threw her cards in a fit of pique and stormed out of the living room. Randy apologized, and we just laughed it off, though it was certainly unsettling. Later that night, Stacy made dinner, and Lucy appeared completely fine, as if her earlier tantrum had never happened. A second red flag. During dinner, Lucy began to share extremely personal and private details about her and Randy's intimate moments, things one simply doesn't discuss in public. I could see Randy's embarrassment and tried to crack jokes and change the subject until she eventually stopped. The rest of the evening was quiet. That night, Stacy woke me, urging me to listen. I heard Lucy and Randy arguing. Their voices were muffled by the closed door and the distance between our rooms, but the angry tones and inflections clearly indicated a heated fight. The awkwardness was palpable, but we decided not to mention it the next day to avoid making Randy feel worse. The following morning and day were uneventful. Randy seemed distant, and Lucy was barely seen or heard. It wasn't until the middle of that night that things took a truly sinister turn. I woke to Randy standing over me, startling me. He looked terrified. He asked if he could stay in our room and if we could lock the door. Confused, I pressed for an explanation. He recounted waking to Lucy standing at the foot of their bed, staring at him. When he asked what she was doing, she merely shrugged and said she was watching him sleep, just in case, whatever that chilling statement implied. He said they stared at each other for a moment before she turned and walked out. When she didn't return after several minutes, he decided to check on her. That's when he noticed a large knife lying on her side of the bed. Horrified, he decided to sneak to our room. He crept through the dark cabin, trying to be silent. In the living room, he heard Lucy humming to herself, wandering as if dancing, almost like a sleepwalker but more unnerving. As she neared our bedroom door, the floor creaked, and she stopped humming. She turned in his general direction and, in an ominous voice, said, "I see you." Randy said she wasn't looking directly at him, just in his direction. She then turned and continued humming and skipping through the dark cabin. That's when he entered our room and locked the door. As I tried to process this terrifying account, Stacy woke up. We were in the middle of nowhere, unsure of what to do. Lucy could have been in an elaborate sleepwalking state, but that didn't explain the knife. As we contemplated, we could still hear Lucy pacing. A few minutes later, the front door slammed shut. We opened our door and Lucy was gone. Randy looked out the window and saw her heading into the freezing forest in just a t-shirt and shorts. He then ran to his bedroom and screamed. The knife was gone. Stacy insisted we had to go get her. We couldn't leave her wandering in the woods in the middle of the night, especially if she was sleepwalking. Randy, however, was terrified and wanted nothing to do with her. Stacy began putting on warm clothes, while Randy pleaded with her to call a park ranger instead. I'd known Randy my whole life and had never seen him so scared. During our brief discussion, we heard the cabin door open and close again. We all fell silent, listening intently. We heard Lucy stomping down the hall towards her and Randy's bedroom, still humming. We remained in our bedroom that night, unable to sleep. At 6 a.m., we heard Lucy in the kitchen, washing dishes. We ventured out, and she greeted us as if nothing was amiss. Stacy and I rationalized it as Lucy just being a bit off, and Randy dealing with the emotional aftermath of his recent breakup. While everything from the night before was undeniably weird, we tried to attribute it to sleepwalking or something similar. Randy, however, was convinced something darker was at play. Stacy quickly dismissed his concerns and went to help Lucy clean, while I tried to console Randy before he returned to his room. Less than 2 minutes later, he texted me, urging me to come to his bedroom immediately and not tell anyone. I went over and he showed me something horrifying. While packing his belongings, he moved Lucy's bag, and as he set it down, a large knife fell out. The same knife he'd seen on her bed the night before. I could both see and feel Randy's terror. He carefully put the knife back in her bag, and we waited in the living room for everyone to be ready to leave. The drive home was thick with tension. Knowing Lucy had that knife in her bag was deeply unsettling. Thankfully, we made it home safe and physically unharmed. Randy ghosted Lucy immediately, and she never tried to contact him again, seeming not to care. Occasionally, Stacy still tries to find Lucy on social media, but she's never had any luck. She's even checked inmate records, but there's no trace of a Lucy. It's as if she never existed, suggesting she used a fake name. If so, what were her true intentions? Was she planning to hurt Randy? I truly have no idea what to make of that weekend. The knife and the absence of any record of her make me believe that whoever she was, she harbored dark intentions. I suppose we can be grateful she never acted on them. Over the past few years, I've truly embraced solitude. I've always been someone who prefers to be alone, enjoying the company of only a select few. A few years ago, my introverted nature was at its peak. I actively sought out peace and quiet, often renting cabins or other secluded places on weekends whenever I had the means. To some, this might seem extreme, but my anxiety surrounding even normal social interactions was so severe that I went to great lengths just to be alone. This intense habit persisted for about 2 years. During one of these weekend cabin getaways, something happened that genuinely unnerved me. The weekend began like any other. I found a secluded cabin about 2 hours from home and made the journey. I typically used these weekends to hike, enjoy the outdoors, and mostly catch up on my reading. I love to read, and being in the quiet wilderness always helps me relax and concentrate. I arrived at the cabin on Friday evening, made a simple dinner, read a few chapters of my book, and went to bed early. The next morning, I decided to take a long hike. I've always found solace in nature, whether it's sunny, rainy, or even snowing. As I hiked through the woods, I heard something behind me, the distinct sound of twigs and branches snapping. While it could have been natural, it sounded too deliberate, almost purposeful. My irrational mind immediately jumped to the conclusion that someone was following me. Yet, every time I turned around and scanned my surroundings, I was completely alone. I continued hiking for a short while longer, but the feeling of paranoia steadily intensified. I had planned to go further, but I decided to cut the hike short and head back to the cabin, as I was no longer enjoying being outside. That night was particularly difficult. Perhaps it was the lingering anxiety from the hike, but I remember feeling profoundly sad. I decided to have a drink, which quickly turned into several. As the alcohol took effect, I felt better, and the earlier anxiety slowly dissipated. I tried to read, but instead I put on some music and just relaxed. Around 11 p.m., I thought I heard a knock at the door. I turned off the music and approached the heavy wooden front door, which had 2 rectangular windows. I looked out, saw nothing, and started to walk away. Before I could sit down, another knock echoed. I returned to the door, and this time, someone was standing there, but it was too dark to make out any details. Before speaking, I turned on the front light, which illuminated the man. He didn't look scary or disheveled. Quite the opposite. A clean-cut man in a suit stood on the other side of the door. He was about 6 feet tall, with an athletic build, clean-shaven, and had slicked-back hair. This man was clearly out of place. He looked prepared for a business meeting, not a late-night walk in the woods. I couldn't comprehend why a man in a suit would randomly appear at a secluded cabin at 11 p.m. From my side of the door, I asked if he was okay and what he wanted. There was a weird, almost unnatural pause before he answered, as if he was processing my words. He finally claimed he had been driving with his girlfriend earlier, had spent hours walking around looking for her, and was now lost. He asked if he could please come inside to call for help. This alone was alarming. A random stranger appearing in the middle of nowhere. But what was most unsettling was the complete lack of emotion in his voice. This did not sound like a man who was lost and missing his girlfriend. He sounded utterly devoid of feeling. I told him to back away from the door and wait at the end of the driveway, promising I would call for help. He paused again, slowly looking around. With the same emotionless tone, he insisted he really needed to come inside. He claimed something was outside, and if he didn't get in for help, he would be in trouble. The tension I felt at that moment is almost indescribable. I told him I was calling the police and that he could either wait outside or leave, but I was not letting him inside the cabin. As I walked away from the door to grab my phone, I heard him say he wanted to hide inside the cabin. He was in trouble and needed to hide. I grabbed my phone, and that's when he began aggressively pounding on the door. I ran back to the door and started screaming vulgar things at the man. In the middle of my rant, I stopped, hearing the man laughing. This was, by far, the most emotion he had shown. I looked out the window, and his face was practically pressed against it, inches from mine. I nearly fell over from the shock of seeing him so close. In a calm voice, he said, "Come on, Victor, just open the door already." Somehow, this stranger in a suit knew my name. I was frozen for a few seconds. Then, without thinking, I dialed 911, explaining I was at a cabin and a strange man was trying to break in. As soon as I hung up, I looked out the window and he was gone. For almost 15 minutes, I waited for the police, never once taking my eyes off the window. During that time, I saw no movement outside. A single patrol car arrived, and I quickly opened the door, letting the officer in. I told him everything, and he seemed concerned and confused. He mentioned that no other surrounding residents had reported anything unusual, and this was the first call of its kind he'd received. He suggested I drive into town and stay at a hotel if I was still scared. I explained that I had been drinking and didn't feel comfortable driving, but I also didn't want to stay there alone. He graciously offered to drive me into town. As we walked to the patrol car, I heard the officer make a strange sound, almost like he was shocked. I asked what was wrong, and he pointed to the tires of my car in the driveway. My tires were deflated and looked like they had been slashed. I started to unravel, but the cop did a good job of keeping me as grounded as possible. He drove me to a nearby hotel and stayed with me in the lobby until I could reach my dad. I stayed in that hotel that night, and my dad picked me up in the morning, helping me arrange for my car to be towed. The cabin owner reached out repeatedly to apologize, but I simply didn't care. I just wanted the experience to be over and didn't even ask for a refund. Some people have suggested that the cabin owner was somehow involved in this nightmare, or even that he was the man in the suit. But I don't think so. The owner's profile picture looked nothing like the man who appeared at my door. I never got any answers, and I'm sure I never will. I still get chills thinking about that night. Even seeing those stupid prism windows freaks me out. I hate knowing that somewhere out there, this man is potentially still terrorizing people. Approximately 6 months ago, my father passed away. I'm not looking for sympathy. I didn't have a good relationship with him. He wasn't a bad person, but he struggled to be a proper father to me specifically. From a young age, I realized I was nothing like him and wouldn't become the person he wanted me to be. I know that bothered him, even if subconsciously. Fast forward to 6 months ago when my father died, and I was surprised to discover he left me his cabin in his will. Friends have joked that this was his final prank, but I don't think so. I believe he knew I would sell it, and that's what he wanted. After dealing with the tedious paperwork, I was informed that to sell it, I needed to clean it up and address any necessary repairs. I used this as an excuse to stay at the cabin one last time, my way of saying goodbye to my father. Upon arriving at the cabin, the first thing that struck me was the horrific smell. It reeked of death. No, he hadn't died in the cabin. He hadn't even visited it in almost a year before his passing. I searched for any dead animals, but I concluded the stench was simply from years of improper cleaning. After the smell, I noticed the cabin looked exactly as I remembered it from when I was 10. The same layout, the same worn couches, the same bookshelves. Literally everything was identical. I spent hours deep cleaning every inch of the downstairs. As I worked through my checklist, I kept hearing rustling and movement coming from above me. That's when I remembered the cabin had an attic. Attic might be a generous term. It was more a hybrid of an attic and a crawl space. In the back hallway, a pull-down cord on the ceiling opened a door and extended a retractable ladder. I slowly ascended, bracing myself for a legion of raccoons or squirrels. Instead, I was assaulted by an even fouler smell than before, a horrible stench that made me cough. After my coughing fit, I looked around in disgust. Boxes were everywhere. But the worst part was the trash. Food wrappers, empty beer cans, garbage scattered across the floor. I knew my dad wasn't the tidiest person, but I never imagined he was this messy and disgusting. I picked up some of the trash, but the smell was overwhelming, and I was exhausted from cleaning downstairs. I wasn't mentally prepared to tackle all the boxes and the upstairs mess at that moment. I took out a bunch of trash and decided I would clean upstairs tomorrow. Not long after, I went to bed, putting clean sheets on his bed and sleeping in his old room. I woke during the night, convinced I heard the rustling again. I started to think perhaps the walls harbored some kind of animal infestation. That would explain the movement. And if animals were living, and possibly dying, in the walls, it would also explain the dreadful smell. The only problem with my theory was that the sounds were clearly coming from above my head, in the attic. Since I wasn't sleeping well, I decided to plug my nose and investigate. When I reached the back hall, I noticed the attic door latch was open and the ladder was hanging down. I thought it was strange, but plausible that I hadn't secured it properly, and wind or raccoons had knocked it loose. As I went to latch the door, I saw another snack food wrapper on the ground at the base of the ladder. I couldn't believe there was more trash. I picked it up, angrily stormed into the kitchen, and threw it away. I grabbed a water bottle, went to the living room, and sat on the couch. It was dark in the living room, and I knew I wouldn't fall back asleep. So I decided to stay awake. There was a small end table next to the couch with a dim lamp. I turned it on. It cast a low, orange light, just enough to prevent complete darkness. My thoughts drifted to my father, then to him in this cabin. I wondered, why would he ever spend time in that nasty, dirty attic when he had the entire cabin to himself? Even if the cabin was disgusting, it was still far better than a filthy attic. As I sat there, I noticed something odd in the corner of the room. What looked like a blanket covering something next to the recliner. That wouldn't normally be strange, but I had cleaned the entire downstairs earlier and didn't recall a blanket covering anything. I slowly got up and approached the blanket, then froze in my tracks. A couple of feet away, I noticed what looked like the bottom of a boot protruding from under it. I slowly stepped back, trying to focus my eyes in the dim room. I stared at the blanket and then watched it subtly shift. It was unmistakably clear. Someone was under that blanket. I hadn't been hearing animals earlier. I had been listening to the sound of a person moving around. I stood there for a second, just watching the blanket. The longer I stared, the more obvious it became that a person was hiding there. I could clearly see the blanket moving up and down with whoever was breathing underneath. I didn't want to discover anything else about this person. I slowly retreated to the kitchen, grabbed my phone and keys, and sprinted out of the cabin. I ran to my car, started it, and began backing down the long driveway. As I backed out, I looked up and saw a scary-looking, mangy man run out the door. He didn't chase my car or anything. He just ran outside and stood in front of the cabin. I called the local police department and reported what happened. They informed me that because my father hadn't been living in the cabin for some time, some random person had likely moved in for warmth, and when no one came to the cabin, he probably just stayed. Judging by the smell, they figured the man had been there for at least a year. which made sense given my father hadn't visited the cabin in a while before he passed away. By the time the police arrived, the man was gone. I have no other information about who he was, where he came from, or where he went. I don't believe he intended to hurt me unless he had to. He clearly had ample opportunities and didn't act. But that doesn't change the terrifying fact that I was sitting next to a strange man who had been living in filth in my father's attic. I never took another step inside that cabin after that night. I hired someone to clean it out without even telling them the full story. Perhaps that makes me a jerk. They got rid of everything inside, and I sold it as is. I hope whoever owns the cabin now finds as much happiness there as my father did, and that they never have to deal with such a surprise visitor. In moments of fear, uncertainty, or danger, reciting Ayatul Kursi acts as a powerful shield. It reminds us that Allah is the ultimate protector over all things. Recite it after every prayer, before sleeping, and when leaving home. No harm can touch you when Allah's protection surrounds you.